Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today and welcome to the second session of the AIJA Women's Network. My name is Jennifer Maxwell and I'm the founder and co-leader of the network. The network was established last year at the Rome Annual Congress in an attempt to try to create a forum to proactively address gender diversity issues that our sector faces by leveraging the excellent network that already exists within AIJA. We had our first session at this year's annual Congress and it was discussed unconscious bias and was a great success. We had the most attendees of any session, so we were quite pleased with that result. Today, we're continuing that success with over 170 attendees of all genders, which shows that today's topic is a really important one for everyone. If you are interested in becoming involved in our network, I would ask you to email me or Paula or one of the two excellent moderators today, Narjas and Clara. There are lots of opportunities for people to get involved as volunteers, as speakers. We have lots of plans going forward. But with that, I'd like to transfer the floor over to Narjas and Clara. They've prepared an excellent session for you today. They've put a lot of work, research, and they've found some great speakers for you to have a thoughtful discussion about the topic of how to engage men in diversity issues. So over to you, Clara and Narjas.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session. So before we get into the address the topic itself, just quickly on the format of the session. So we'll start with a virtual discussion with our speakers, and then we will have a Q&A session for the last 15 minutes. So please do share any questions you may have, and we'll try to, unpermitting, address as many as we can. So before Clara introduces our speakers, just give you a brief sort of introduction on this topic. And when we talk about diversity, I think it's very, very important to keep in mind that diversity has many facets, visible facets, invisible facets. So the visible facets of diversity will be gender, ethnicity, culture. The invisible facets are the personality styles, the learning styles, working and thinking styles. And it's very important that when we think about diversity, we consider diversity in a broad sense of the term, and that diversity be promoted in its multiple facets. With that being said, so I thought I would share with you as well the materials we've used to prepare this session. Two excellent studies. The first one, Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters, published by McKinsey in May 2020. And the other piece of research is the CS Gender 3000 in 2019, The Changing Face of Companies, published by Credit Suisse Research Institute. So really encourage you to download and read these materials. Contain a lot of really valuable information. And some of this information is actually very compelling facts about diversity, how diversity is a source of competitive advantage and a core enabler of growth and value creation for a business. And the studies I've referenced actually demonstrate how companies in the top quartile on gender diversity are more likely to outperform other companies in the same data set. And these studies have shown as well there is a significant correlation between board and executive management diversity and how a business performs. So one of the very compelling statistics is that companies with more than 30% of women on executive teams are significantly more likely to outperform those with between 10 and 30% women on the executive teams. And in turn, these companies are more likely to outperform those with fewer or no women executives. So the facts are quite compelling. And to further illustrate that, we can see that there are actually businesses nowadays are sorry, I have to say this. There's a growing polarization between those companies that are what we would categorize as the diversity winners, who adopt very ambitious and bold steps in terms of diversity, and those who are lagging behind. So to illustrate that, we can see that companies in the bottom quartile for gender diversity are more likely to underperform by up to 90% than companies with more diversity. So what we're trying to illustrate here is that we're not debating actually anymore if diversity is the right thing to do. It is. The benefits of diversity and inclusion are objectively measurable and measured, and the facts speak for themselves. So just before we address the question on how we involve men in the diversity debate, just wanted to touch quickly on the point of why we want to do that. And why men need to be part of the discussion is that the reality is that diversity and equality can never be really achieved if men are not part of the discussion. If we look at the society as a broad, men are the policy makers. Men make decisions at the level of family as well, and many of those decisions are made by men. When we look at the workplace as well, more often than not, men are the business leader and therefore the primary drivers of company strategy and organizational transformation. So for diversity to be successful, senior leaders need to be the champion of diversity representations and set the expectations within their organization. So it is very clear that men have a central place in the discussion and action. So how do we get them engaged? And I will pass on to Clara to introduce our speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narges, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with you all and to have the opportunity to discuss this very interesting topic with our great speakers. As Narges said, actually bringing down the barriers that hinder men from engaging in the diversity debate cannot be done without men. And this is why we choose two excellent men speakers to discuss today with us this issue. The first of them is Andrew Ray, who is the president and CEO of Golden Star Resources Ltd, which is a mining company operating in Ghana, West Africa. And why did we choose this company? Well, it's because this organization values diversity and inclusion, and it has undertaken several initiatives to create employment opportunities for Ghanaian nationals, and specifically the host communities from around the mines, which have successfully resulted in a 98% of Ghanaian workforce. Sorry, I tried to pronounce Ghanaian, which is not easy at all. Apologize. And then also applied other initiatives to further drive diversity in a more extended notion. Our second excellent speaker is Jérôme Auguet, founder and managing director of the Zurich company InLead, which stands for Inclusive Leaders, which is very good for today's discussion. Jérôme is a business consultant in financial and professional services industries and an international certified executive coach. He has a significant experience in assisting organizations in developing inclusive leadership practices and working environments, with the aim, of course, of to create genuine value from diversity. So without further ado, let's start with the discussion and with our first question to our two speakers. And the question is the following. So in your experience, are men on board with diversity? And if this is not the case, what element could prevent them to really engage in the discussion? Maybe let's start from an alphabetic point of view. Andrew, do you want to start?
Thank you very much, Clara, and good afternoon. I think we're afternoon, certainly in all of Europe now. So good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And coming, as Narges and Clara mentioned, from an industry that is probably one of the more undiverse industries, the mining industry. That's certainly historically the case. It's also the opportunity for us to make a change. I think to the question, are men on board? I think if you ask most male leaders and get them to think about it, in principle, they would say yes. But in my experience, there's a big divergence sometimes between what different people understand by diversity. So prior to the mining industry, I was in investment banking, which there's a bit of a theme there in terms of male-dominated industries, if you want. But certainly my experience there was that what you often saw in terms of particularly gender diversity was the more successful women tended to be those that adopted male traits, which actually isn't diversity. So, you know, the thinking was, well, we've got more women in senior positions, but I think for women to be able to do that, they had to almost adopt more male traits in that industry, which actually misses the point. That isn't diversity, is having a diverse group of people being themselves. And that's where you really get some of those benefits that Narges was alluding to, that the studies uncover. So that, I think that's the challenge. And I think, you know, for men, it's not something necessarily, you know, I'm sort of, I guess, more of a stereotypical male leader of a business, that you don't see the issue day to day from a personal perspective. Therefore, you've got to constantly either remind yourself or be reminded of it. And you have a lot of other priorities that then certain things can get relegated. So I think it's raising that awareness and, you know, people actually seeing it, understanding it, knowing that's the case, and being aware of what's going on around them before you can actually address it, and then understanding what we actually want to achieve with diversity.
Thank you, Andrew. And Jérôme, what is your take on this? Do not forget to mute, Joe.
Okay, thank you, and sorry. I heard that this is one of the new sentences that has been most heard over the last few months. You are on mute, or unmute yourself, please. Hi everybody. I'm very pleased to be a part of this discussion this afternoon. Well, based on my experience, and I totally share the views of Andrew on whether our men engage or not in this topic. They are. But I think it's a very complex topic as such, and it requires more than just one gender to make things evolve or change. And I'm sure we are going to talk about maybe what is the most critical field to work on to make things change. It would be about corporate culture from my point of view. And this is not something that just one person or minority can make change. So it really needs a critical mass of people who engage in this debate, and not just about men or women or other minorities, depending on in which sphere you are. What I observe also is what could prevent maybe men to get involved in this debate or to engage even more strongly. At least in Western Europe, what I can observe is that there is as soon as you use some words like diversity or promoting diversity, there are some perception that are not necessarily right, but they are not that are for sure counterproductive. For example, what I hear in Switzerland or in Germany or in France is that diversity equals woman. And this is something that needs to be also corrected, changed, because it's not just about women. And I'm sure we will be talking later on about how to frame this topic, how to frame objective in this field, because it's really tricky and it's not easy at all. But I think if we can already start changing and using some other words maybe, but and also to demonstrate that diversity as such brings advantages for both gender and for all the population, let's say, and this not just professionally speaking, because there is a so-called business case for diversity, and Narges mentioned that earlier. and I totally go along with their studies and what Nad just said. But there is also a lot of advantages of more diversity, of broader diversity, more equality, also on a personal level, and not just for women, also for men. I do facilitate workshop with leaders with different, well, large companies or mid-sized companies, with leaders, men and women. And sometimes I really have the chance to facilitate sessions just with exclusively with men, with male leaders. And there is, without any exception, there is at one moment in this workshop, there is always a discussion happening that and where men express their concern on their own level. They would, a lot of these leaders are parents, a father in this case, and they would love, for example, spend more time with the kids. But the social pressure in the environment they work in is that make it very difficult for them to step back and maybe ask for working part-time, for example. And when we bring these advantages which are not gendered, if you bring the advantage of maybe part-time work or flexible work model, then it's benefit both gender. And this is something that needs to be, I think, much more emphasis as just maybe advantage for one gender or the other one. But I'm sure we will be discussing more about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jérôme and Andrew. So just my second question was to really one of the points that I think we're all clear on it. This is a difficult conversation. It's a very complex topic, and it can bring up a lot of sensitivity. So what is your advice on actually having an open and productive discussion on a topic that is sensitive like this?
Me to start on that now, Jess? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it partly what Jérôme touched on in terms of the culture of a business, because actually having an open and productive discussion in a business on anything only happens if people feel they're able to speak and they don't fear reprisal or consequence by speaking out. For us as a business, we recently did a culture survey. It's the first one I took over last year. It's the first one with the new team in place. And, that came up as a clear issue within the business, that people feel reticent to really speak up. So I think part of the tone from the top and leadership is I always try and create an atmosphere where people speak their minds and feel free to speak their minds. We don't have to agree, and we have to discuss to reach agreement. But I think the key thing is creating that forum where people feel that they've got the freedom to speak. But the flip side of that is then actually listening to what they say, because you can give up everyone the opportunity to speak, be reading emails or almost, your mind's thinking about some other problem in the meantime. And that's not listening. I think the listening part is just as important. So for me, those two elements, and you'll start to get people, I think we're starting to see it in the business now, people opening up and speaking and raising issues, and not every issue is going to get resolved. But I think everybody collectively feels that they're empowered to do that. And, we need to encourage that.
Maybe to rebound on what Andrew just said, I think there is a lot of elements that play a critical role in making things change and advancing the debate. But what I've observed many times, and what I really recommend to do, and it's really tricky to reach that to a large extent, but it's all about transparency about the challenges of all genders, but all generation and all. I mean, there is so many facets of diversity. So, as Nadia said, there is so many facets that are visible. Otherwise, but the majority is not visible. So, I mean, it's really what is the organization made of in terms of diversity, and try to make sure that everybody, everybody in its own individuality feel safe, really, feel secured, feel valuable, also to raise his own or her own concern, but not just about concern. When we talk about when I talk about transparency, I think it's also important to not just about the challenges, but also the needs and the wishes and the ambitions that individual can have, that team can have, or that organization can have, and also the terms of I do support not just leaders in leveraging diversity. I do support also talents, let's say female talent, or support ambitious women in advancing their career. And I think it's really key to, oh, sorry, I just lost track what I wanted to say. Yeah, it's back. It's live, right? Transparency in terms of criteria. When it comes to advanced women career in an organization, what I observe is that in most cases there is no clear criteria to what are the requirements to make the next career step. And when these requirements are defined, there is usually what is missing at that stage is usually the grid. You know, how are you going to evaluate these requirements? And in most cases, this is not available. There is a minority of companies, maybe the biggest one, who has that kind of process and criteria and requirement set down. But in most cases, it's not the case. And it's if it is the case, that is not communicated openly on this. So it's very difficult to prepare to make a career, to prepare to learn. You know, maybe you have some, for sure, everybody has some talents, competences, but maybe you are missing something, or you should develop maybe competence or experience in a very specific field, and you have no clue about that. So I think transparency is a key. It's a key topic to look at in this context.
Actually, I agree with both of you, and I think that communication is quite a key word in all these discussions, and there is a fear of saying the wrong thing at the wrong place, and it goes both from men, for example, when they have to express themselves on a topic that is gender related, and you see everybody gets wet and everything because they are afraid of saying something that could be perceived as insulting, but also from the women point of view, where you want to ask something but you are not sure whether the question that you're asking, for example, as you were mentioning, Jérôme, the requirements to get to the next step of a career, well, you don't know if you are allowed to ask, or if you ask that, you will show that you are not sure of yourself. So it's something that it's really very speaking to me, at least. On following up on this question, so we want to change things. We want that a culture change in the company is set, but how do you ensure that this change is sustained, so it remains all over the years actually, and the changes within the organization? And do you maybe have some concrete examples that you would like to share with the audience? Jérôme, you can start.
Well, I wanted to pass on Andrew, because he just mentioned before that he did his career the cultural assessment a year ago, something like that, with very recently. And I think this is the most practical example that you can, and it go along with what I recommend to my client to start with. So I would love to pass on you to give it over to you.
Thanks, Jérôme. Yeah, I think, again, if you just take a little step back, it does come back to leadership and, you know, the example that leaders are giving, and they may need training, and, you know, people may need to be helped to understand, you know, what actually do we mean by diversity? What does a program look like? You know, you got to try and ensure you get a diverse set of people involved. Somebody in the business to me said the other day, we were trying to attract women to certain roles, but if the only people they see when they come up for interview or maybe look on the website are men, well, that's obviously going to paint a certain picture, which isn't necessarily accurate, but you need to consider all of that. And I think, you know, some of the things you do, we mentioned a culture survey, then the only way I think you'll actually continue to engage people in that sort of thing is if you then drive feedback. So, you know, what we've been clear to do is to really plan out the communication and feedback from that survey to deliver the messages coming out of it, and then how the issues raised are going to be dealt with. You know, most companies, and certainly most companies in our sector, have a lot of systems of differentiation within them. So, you know, simple things like when you go to a mine site, and particularly in Ghana, you'll have a junior mess and a senior mess. And, you know, the important people will all go and sit with each other, and the perceived less important people all sit with each other. So, you know, we make a point of going and just sitting with everyone and having an open chat, because it starts to actually break down those barriers. And you know, you talk to people about families, sport, you know, whatever, politics, it can be anything, but it's actually starting to engage with people on a human level. And, you know, that's as important, men and women, as it is different nationalities, people who've got different colored skin, whatever it might be. You know, at the end of the day, it comes back to probably some basic interest that we all have in mind. So, you know, I think that's important, and removing symbols of differentiation. I once, in a previous company, we had a program called 100 Small Things, and trying to identify all those little things, like the general manager would have his parking space outside the office block, you know, or different colored uniforms. It's things that get built into organizations that you maybe don't think about, you don't understand. You know, for us, not having proper PPE, and everybody in the UK knows what PPE is now because of the COVID crisis, personal protective equipment, but not having, and it's still a challenge for us, not getting the right equipment for women. You don't have the right sizes of things. It's just, you know, again, a man might not necessarily think about that because he's never come across it. So there's small things that on the surface perhaps are less relevant, but you start to attack them as a group, and then people perceive change. And I think that that's important.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's really so insightful to hear also well these practical examples, and how I used to say that culture is ubiquitous, but is so challenging to spot as catching a fish with bare hands, and it's really great to hear this. And cultural development within a group or organization is really complex. I mean, you have different dimensions. There are different models for this. I mean, just to set this as a strategic objective is not enough for sure. And because culture is not the values, not necessarily the values that you write down on your corporate website, or that you publish on your corporate website, or publish in a glossy brochure for HR, employee branding HR brochure. I mean, they serve as value, but usually what culture is what people experience day by day in their daily interactions. And so it's really tricky to spot what it is really the culture of a company, and to start with to spot this is really, it's important to make a so-called assessment, and to ask as much, a very broad audience of people who are immersing in this culture since a while, and to really bring the true values from the bottom to the top, and really look then at the second as a second step. What is the culture of the company, and maybe to compare it to the ambition of the company, and to the culture that maybe the company wants to incarnate in future, in terms of being maybe closer to the society, or closer to their clients, to their markets. I mean, this is something evolving as well. What I do see when I'm discussing this topic of cultural development with decision maker, they usually say, well, we cannot change the culture. It will take 30 years and more. And then, no, yes, it's a long-lasting process and a transformative process, but it's not about changing the whole culture. It's just to spot a few values or behavior, or no, you know, an unwritten law, unwritten rules that are maybe hindering the emergence of more equality. So it's not changing a culture from 100%, is maybe make some adaptation. And I think it's really key to differentiate this. And maybe a last point about cultural development from my point of view is, it's nice to have external advisor, like well, I have this role sometimes, but change happens from within. So it's important that well, for sure, the strategies needs to be set, an agenda needs to be set, but the organization needs to be evolved, the process needs to be evolved, but the culture needs to be lived up every day. And this is not just a matter of leaders or of the leadership of management team. They have a tremendous role to play, because they sure walk the talk, but it's also something that need to be incarnated by every single employee on a daily basis. And this is why I think in this context it's so important to work not just with minorities, maybe in some well, can be women, can be men, can be the other race, I don't know. But I mean, it's really important to work with all the people that are making this organization. So with men and women in the field of diversity and gender diversity. It's really key.
You have to unmute yourself, not just.
Sorry. So we appreciate, I mean, it is a vast task and requires people to be involved at all levels of the organization. So from a practical standpoint, at a time now, like, for example, many businesses have been dealing with a lot of complications and challenges that have arisen, as a consequence of COVID, and whether it's an impact to companies' revenues, it could be an impact to your supply chain, a lot of issues to deal with. So how do we go about maintaining this as a priority in the face of all the other priorities, and making sure sort of it doesn't fall between the cracks because it's not the priority of the moment? Andrew, I'd be keen to hear your view on that as a business leader.
Yeah, I think a couple of points I'd make. One, it does need to be a core part of the business strategy. Now, I agree with Jerome, just because it is doesn't mean it happens, but I think you don't lose focus of your core strategy in the business, notwithstanding pandemics and other issues that come out of left field and maybe hit you, but your strategic long-term direction remains. So clearly diversity needs to be fully embedded there. But I think also people have got to understand the benefits and understand that diversity brings benefits. To some of the studies you mentioned, Narges, like the McKinsey one. The reality is, as I look at it, if I just take gender diversity, 50% of the potential talent pool is women and 50% is men, roughly speaking. So as a business, we start from a point where we have 94% men and 6% women. That's the reality. So, there's a huge part of the potential talent pool that we're not tapping, that provides us with an opportunity. So I think, you've got to see diversity bringing benefits to the business, that yes, you're always going to have short-term pressing priorities, but you also have to keep sight of where you want your business to move to. And ultimately, those businesses that are going to succeed are, I think, going to be, by definition, more diverse businesses. So I think, once you do that, you integrate as a core part of your strategy. And then it's about, ensuring the communication is there and people really are aware of that to make it happen. And, you become hopefully somewhere that a diverse group of people want to work.
Yeah, and I totally share the view of Andrew on this topic. I mean, for sure, COVID and I mean, it's changed the world, but I do hope that it will not be the the new normal for the next 100 years or 50 years. So I think it's, and I do not want to play with the word, but I think diversity promotion or equality in business is not, should not be a business priority. It's a business imperative. So it's a bit, there is a slight difference between both terms, and I think this is really a long-lasting topic that have an impact on all part of the businesses, and it's at the end it's all about how can organizations better reflect their markets, their customers, their communities, and we see clearly there is a discrepancy on that side, and so I think, and I do believe that COVID is one word, but it has well, various impacts on families, on communities, on well, for sure, on organization. I think we exactly when the world encounter such massive disruptive trend or change, let's say like the pandemic, I think in this very moment we need even more diversity to spot the best possible response to such a complex topic. And this is all about, for me, all about diversity, the diversity of thoughts, of experience, of perspective. It is that diversity that at the end I do recommend my clients to promote beyond gender, beyond generation, cultural background, etc., etc.
Thank you very much to both of you. I have a tricky question now. We will start and we will see who will start answering. No, it's as far as I'm concerned, I change my mind quite every day. So I'm interested in knowing what is your position on that. What do you think about quotas, and how do you think these quotas are perceived by men in the business world? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I'm happy to.
As you'd like, yeah.
As you say, it is a tricky question. There's no easy answer, but I think in principle, yes, I agree with quotas in certain situations. Where we're dealing with something where there's a fundamental mismatch, and you've got to try somehow to promote a more equal outcome, then sometimes you can call it quota if you want, or targets, however you address it. We as an organization, as I said, have started with 6%, slightly higher now, but we've set ourselves a target in 5 years of getting to 20%, which is clearly still not where we need to be in terms of proportion of women within the business. But we have a lot of work to do to be able to create the conditions to pull those people into the business. And we know that, and it may seem unambitious, but there's going to be a lot of planning behind that to start to create the flow of people that enable us to achieve that. And if we didn't start setting those sort of targets, then I think the imperative to act isn't really there. And I think there's a lot of business advantage to it. It is going to be something that needs to be and does need to be managed, because those that are perhaps not in the target group, in this case men, are going to feel threatened, and they feel as though that then creates a situation that is unequal towards them. So you're trying to correct a situation that is not in balance, that is not right, and sometimes there is no perfect way of doing that. So I think for us, what we've done, set a clear target that we think is achievable, and if we go beyond there in that period, that's fantastic. But then it's about the planning. How do you actually do that? Because, again, we don't want to just say, oh, we've hired a lot of women, isn't that great? We want to actually bring the people through, train them, get them to advance in the organization, and create leaders of tomorrow there as well, create skilled people that, you know, might go on and use those skills elsewhere. But, you know, we have to have a very clear strategy of how we're going to do that, particularly for us as an industry that historically hasn't attracted women. So, you know, what do we need to change to attract women? And we've got women's groups at our site. We are partnering with Women in Mining to bring people in. We have people that do national service in Ghana every year, and we're trying to make sure that most, if not all of those people are women in the future, because it is then creating a pipeline of talent for the business. So, you know, it's one word, it's short, it's easy to say, but to actually achieve that is where all of the plumbing and infrastructure needs to go into place. But you only make that happen by setting some sort of target, in my view.
Yeah, it's a really tough question, and well, it's good to be able to have some humor as we were preparing this session today, and I think this is a tough question. And what I can share with you is I never I'm supporting leaders to develop their inclusiveness and to develop inclusive working culture, but I also work with talented women, for example. And I never met in the last 7 years one single woman that would have been happy to be promoted because of a quote. I never heard that from a woman, and I never heard from men to the wish to be discriminated, even if it's in the technical language we would maybe speak about positive discrimination. I mean, nobody wants that. But I do share the views of Andrew. I mean, if you don't set yourself as an organization any kind of targets, the probability that nothing will change is really big. So you need to have some ambition, to formulate some ambition, especially in business. We know that what can be measured get done usually. But I think quote has an other connotation. It comes from outside, from the political scene. It is kind of and business manager leaders do not want too much influence of politicians or politics in the way how they run the business. I think there is a need for some targets, not necessarily for quotes. And I think maybe it's for organization also good to try to reframe a little bit this, and instead of trying to set goals to promote minorities, which is actually well meant usually, but it's counterproductive. Is usually you stigmatize this minority you want to promote. So maybe you can try to limit the homogeneity of the organization to a certain degree, and saying no more, I don't know, 70% max or 60% max white men in the board, for example. Why not? I mean, it could be maybe an interesting experiment to do.
Thank you, Jérôme and Andrew, for addressing this difficult question. I think it's not always easy to express an opinion on questions like these. I think we all agree that change is underway. I think it's also fairly clear that change is very slow, perhaps too slow, and a lot remains to be done in bridging the gap. So how do you see things evolving from here? And specifically, there's been a lot of talk in the last 12 to 18 months about ESG, the importance of environmental, social, and governance in investment decision. It's been, it's been a central topic in conferences around many different industries. So it's cross-industry. And do you see it as a factor of acceleration of all these efforts to bridge the gap in the various inequalities in terms of diversity? So we'll start with Andrew.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about the speed of change. One of my questions to this association was what actually is a young lawyer, which is a difficult question to ask. But as you can probably see, I don't qualify in the category of young lawyer. But it sometimes is your perception, because typically I would say somebody maybe more from my generation and older will see change very differently to, say, my kids who are in their 20s. And, you know, for them, change isn't happening, it's not coming. Whereas you ask the older generations and they'll say change happens too quickly, there's too much of it. So it's always interesting perception. Someone told me actually the other day that at the current rate of development, it'll be 202 years until we get gender equality in the workplace. So I don't think any of us will live to see that. So we certainly got to speed that up. But you know, I think I'm optimistic, because if I look at where the times we're living in, communication is a massive part of actually promoting change. And, you know, you look at the speed at which communication moves these days. You know, just this year, the whole Black Lives Matter campaign took off in a heartbeat, because it spread like wildfire and people organized themselves that way. We had what was called the Arab Spring a couple of years ago, which again, through social media and communication, started to become a real movement. So I think, you know, that there can be so much that's positive in communication to promote awareness. And, you know, we got to be careful what we do with information. But, you know, technology, we're all on a Zoom call. So that's probably because a lot of us are working from home and have successfully done for a period of time. That in itself helps to change working practices. That helps to break down some of those barriers. You know, we live, certainly I do, in a society, and probably most of us, where it's assumed, you know, men work, women look after children. Now, yes, there's been a lot of change there, but I still think some of those unconscious biases exist. And working patterns shifting, you know, I think I talk to friends and male friends, loads and loads of them, particularly those with kids, will tell you how happy they are to have spent more time at home, to take the kids to school in the morning or pick them up in the afternoon, maybe something they'd never done. So I think it's again back to opening people's eyes of working in a slightly different way, which will be, you know, a real promoter of equality, diversity, and then ESG. I mean, I think ESG is a massive change. And, you know, that is a wave that is upon us that is just building and building and building. Again, if I talk to my kids, I talk to their friends, I see how much it matters. So any business or industry that doesn't take that into account and doesn't try to get ahead of that wave is going to be swamped, and they are not going to succeed. For us as a mining business, that is of critical importance, you know, particularly in terms of a lot of the environmental side of things, the social side of things. The mining industry does a huge amount of work which it communicates generally quite poorly, but it's been at the forefront of a lot of these things for many years. And I think we really need to move our game up in terms of continuing that work, communicating it better, but understanding that, you know, ESG from the perspective of us going and trying to get investment used to be, oh, you used to have to maybe get through a gateway, or they'd ask you a few questions. It's going to be embedded into investment processes firmly and squarely going forward. And if you don't run your business in a way that can be seen to be sustainable and adhere to those principles, you're going to struggle to raise investment, you're going to have a higher cost of capital, and ultimately you're not going to succeed. So I see that as a huge opportunity for the industry and industry more broadly, but as a challenge that we need to really be fully aware of every day.
Well, I'm really not an expert in ESG, but looking at law firm, what I'd really like in terms of what I could observe the last few years is that really the topic is reach the top in terms of this is really relevant. And what I could also observe is that there is almost every day more companies sending RFPs to law firm who add some criteria on diversity, and I like this way. We cannot speak about self-regulation, but or pure self-regulation, but I really like the idea that because there is a sensitiveness for the topic, and say that is relevant for businesses. When a company is sending an RFP, request for proposal, to a law firm, and add some criteria on equality or on diversity, this is a nice way also to make it a business imperative for them, and also to collaborate, to partner with other organizations, or with business partners that share the same concern and the same ambition to make things advance. And that is really key from my point of view, and I really like to see that kind of example. If I dare just to say a few words about law firm and how the change, what the change that I kind of observe is really here. I think, and we've seen that culture is really a topic that it is really complex and needs the attention of the top of everybody, but especially or in particular from leaders. What I can see in law firm that they invest more and more in developing or coaching future partner, female or male partner. So invest on they really support ambitious and talented people to reach the top, and doing so, I think they also support already the process of making things change and bringing the next gen to the top of the organization, to better reflect also the client base that they have, or the future clients profile that they will have. So I really like that. In terms of culture, to go back on this topic, in terms of culture has a lot to do with leadership. I mean, it's how people work, interact every day, and it's how our leaders are leading inclusively this diversity as such. And I do see some area of improvement, maybe our area of focus on in law firm is most people working, most lawyer and most partner haven't I would say a broad experience in leading people, in understanding what it is really, how to engage people in their work, how to communicate maybe with them, and maybe law firm, from my point of view, should continue investing, and maybe investing even more in developing their talents, men and women, future talent, future leaders, but also invest maybe a bit more on the side of developing leaders, developing leadership skills, in this sense that is really also required. You need to work on both sides to make really change happen.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's absolutely fascinating what you are discussing with us today. We have a lot of very interesting questions coming from the audience. I'm not sure we will have time to go through all of them, but just let's pick some of them. There is one from David who asked, what would be the top 3 advice that we as men should do on a practical level? Sorry, I hope you understood the question. Despite Jérôme,
can you repeat maybe the question?
What would be the 3 top advice for a man to do on a practical level to help in the discussion, in the debate?
Well, may I don't know if it will be 3, but spontaneously I think of 2 things. I think I think it's to stand to oneself first, and when I mean that, it's before embracing different perspective or diversity as in a broad sense, is really to embrace oneself and to stand to who I am. And what I want to say with this is that maybe men especially have this tendency to think they need to be strong, to know all the answer, don't to show any weaknesses. And I mean, we are not Superman, even if maybe we like to look that kind of movies. But I mean, it's really to stand to who we are, to our strengths, talent, but also to what we are not bringing in, because we are nobody can. I mean, and I think to develop this humility to stand to what we do not know, or what we can't do on our own. It's also why it's so important and cool to be with other people in a team, for example, and also to have the courage to stand to oneself, the courage to ask for questions. I think this both qualities maybe to develop humility and courage that would help, I would say, and that make great leaders from my point of view. Spontaneously. Andrew.
No, I'd agree. I think that self-awareness element is critical. Actually, as one of the, I guess, in preparation, but just to test myself ahead of this session, I did an implicit association test online, which I'd never done before. And it was only because I was reading about something that I came across it. It was from Harvard. So I thought I would do one on gender, because you've got to actually recognize your own thinking. And we all have these unconscious biases that we're just not aware of. Everyone has them. So I did it, and it came out with, I had a sort of a slight bias to men. At least it was slight, moderate, and strong. And I think sort of generally moderate to strong is what mostly comes out. So, you know, test your own awareness of that and be honest with yourself, and then listen to other people. You know, ask the questions and listen, because you'll only really understand how people think by listening to them, and then think through it yourself. So, you know, through your career, I think there are important things to do. Maybe put yourself in a position slightly out of your comfort zone and experience something that maybe you haven't before, and see it from somebody else's perspective, because it can be quite uncomfortable, but actually quite illuminating.
I'd like to rebound on the last point of Andrew. Yes, it's very practical things to do to experience. It's to bring yourself outside of your comfort zone, and in this topic of diversity and inclusion, we very often hear the notion of privilege, being a privileged position, and it's difficult to get aware of my own privilege when I'm in my, let's say, in my usual environment where I know everything, where I'm not a minority. So to put yourself I mean, with a lot of love for yourself, but also without putting yourself too far into danger, to be prudent, but try to expose yourself to a situation where from one moment to the other one, you are not in the majority, but in the minority. It can be pretty much easy. It happened to me 21 years ago as I moved from the French-speaking part to the German-speaking part of Switzerland. I mean, it's even if you know the language, it's a big change. The culture is not the same one. And then you start to realize that without knowing why, but it doesn't work as it was working before. And there you don't have the same quality of interaction. And I also had once the chance to attend a very interesting keynote presentation in Zurich here, but it was a woman-only events, but it was not. It hasn't been advertised as such. But and I did a register, and they accept me, and I found myself in a group of more or less 100 women, and there were only 2 men, the keynote and myself. And it was interesting to observe what it made with me. And that kind of experience can help you to, well, again, to develop your humility, to become better self-aware, and to open up maybe even more, to embrace maybe even more different perspectives, different personalities, and so on.
Thank you very much, Jérôme and Andrew, for joining us today. Sadly, we don't have time for any additional questions. We'll be handing the floor to François Barré, President of AIJA, to share with us a few comments. But just want to thank you again for joining us today, Andrew and Jérôme, and for all the great insights you've shared with us today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
From my side too, really, it was great.
A lot of thank yous on my side too, obviously. Thank you, Narges, Clara, and Jen. And thank you to our wonderful speakers, Andrew and Jérôme. It was very interesting. And thank you for raising a awareness on such an important topic, and reminding us that we're no longer debating whether or not diversity is necessary, but clearly advancing the debate to its concrete implementation. And Andrew, I will remember this 100 Small Thing initiative. I think it's a great idea and a very good concrete exercise. So I will try to do it on my side too. And thank you to the Women Network for this great initiative, and to Paula Fudakowska, our immediate past president, for launching this group last year with the help of Jen. And thank you to our 100+ listeners. Obviously, stay tuned for any other session from the Women Initiative group. And if you want to get involved in the process, contact Jen, Narges, or Clara, and they will make sure that they will follow up. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.